The day my brother called me selfish was the same day I paid off his mortgage. I still remember the weight of my phone in my hand, the slight tremor in my fingers as I stared at the confirmation email from the bank. $237,456.19 transferred from my retirement savings. The culmination of 20 years of careful planning and modest living, gone in a single transaction, all to save him from foreclosure. Again. Jesus, Karen, I said thank you already. What more do you want from me? David's voice crackled through the speaker. In the background, I could hear the clink of ice in a glass, the slight slur in his words that meant he was already on his second bourbon of the afternoon. It's not like you have kids or anything to spend it on. The sunlight streaming through my kitchen window suddenly felt cold. I ran my fingertips over the granite countertop I'd installed myself last summer, the only luxury I'd allowed myself in the past decade. The smooth stone felt like a silent rebuke. I wasn't asking for more gratitude, David. I was just wondering if you'd thought about what you're going to do moving forward. The financial advisor I mentioned. Christ, here we go. St. Karen with her financial advice. His laugh was sharp enough to cut. Not everyone wants to live like a monk, you know. Some of us actually enjoy life instead of hoarding every penny. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar knot in my chest. Part anger, part hurt, part a lifetime of being the responsible one. The family fixer, the never-ending bank of Karen. That hoarding just saved your house, I said quietly. And you'll never let me forget it, will you? David snapped. That's your problem, Karen. You think because you have money, you're better than everyone else. You're just selfish with it, always keeping score. I looked out the window at my modest backyard. The garden I never had time to tend properly. The patio furniture still in boxes because I worked 60-hour weeks. The wind chimes my mother had given me before she died, now silent in the still afternoon air. I have to go, I said finally. Yeah, whatever. Melissa wants us to come for Christmas this year, by the way. She's thinking we'll all stay at your place since you have all those empty bedrooms. Melissa, my sister-in-law, who hadn't spoken a word to me at our mother's funeral, but had found time to ask for money for her life coaching business before the reception was over. I'll think about it, I said, knowing I wouldn't. Don't be difficult, Karen. Family first, right? That's what Mom always said. Family first, my mother's mantra. The words that had guided, no, consumed, my entire adult life. The reason I had postponed graduate school to care for her during her illness. The reason I had given up a promotion that required relocation when my father had his stroke. The reason my brothers and sisters saw me as nothing more than an ATM with a pulse. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen island, surrounded by the house I rarely got to enjoy, filled with the crushing silence of a life half-lived. I opened my financial app and stared at the decimated numbers. My retirement, now pushed back by at least a decade. The trip to Portugal I'd been planning for 5 years would have to wait, again. My phone pinged with a text from my sister, Lisa. Hey, Kay. Hate to ask, but Madison's tuition is due. Short about $4,000. Can you help? We'll pay back next month. Madison, my 19-year-old niece, who had told me last Thanksgiving that my job in systems management sounded boring as hell. The same niece who posted Instagram photos from Cancun last week on a trip I hadn't known about. I set the phone down without answering. For the first time in my life, I felt something inside me crack. Not the familiar bend of accommodation, but a clean, sharp break. My family had been taking from me for so long that they no longer saw me as a person. I was a resource, a means to an end, the responsible one, the one who would always say yes. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, pattering against the window like a question repeated over and over. When will enough be enough? I didn't know the answer yet, but for the first time, I was ready to find out. The truth is, I designed my own prison cell, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice, until the walls were too high to see over. It started small, the way these things often do. When I was 9, I gave my allowance to my brother David so he could buy a baseball glove. When I was 14, I lent my sister Lisa my college fund savings, $212.47, so she could buy a prom dress. Neither was ever repaid. By the time I was in college, working 2 jobs while maintaining a 3.8 GPA, it seemed perfectly normal that half my earnings went to helping my parents cover family emergencies. The pattern was as predictable as the seasons. Crisis, call Karen, Karen fixes it. Brief gratitude, then tension when I suggested ways to prevent the next disaster. Rinse and repeat. I pulled into the parking lot of Harriman Systems, where I'd worked for the past 17 years. The gray corporate building loomed ahead, as familiar to me as my own reflection. I'd missed countless family events for this job, birthdays, recitals, casual Sunday dinners, but it had provided the stability my family relied on, the stability they resented me for having. "Morning, Karen," called Tara, the receptionist. "Your brother called already, said it was urgent." "Of course he did." "Thanks," I said, forcing a smile as I headed to my office. James, my boss, caught me in the hallway. "Karen, got a minute?" Inside his office, I noticed the gleam in his eyes immediately. "The Portland Project. We got it, and I want you to lead." The Portland Project, a career-making opportunity. 6 months in Oregon, establishing a new divisional headquarters. The salary bump alone would replenish what I'd given David in 2 years instead of 10. I started, my mind immediately calculating the reactions. Mom had been dead for 3 years, Dad for 5, but their voices still echoed in my head. "Family first, Karen. They need you close by." James must have seen the hesitation. "It's a big move, I know, but you've earned this, Karen. No one in this company works harder than you do." I thought about my empty house, my depleted retirement account, the family that only called when they needed something. "Can I have the weekend to think about it?" I asked. At home that night, I found myself standing in front of my mother's china cabinet, the one piece of furniture I'd taken after she died. Inside were photographs spanning decades. My graduation, where I stood alone because everyone else was at David's baseball tournament. Lisa's wedding, where I'd paid for the flowers, but been seated at a table with distant cousins. My nieces and nephews opening Christmas gifts I'd carefully selected and wrapped, their thank you notes perfunctory when they came at all. The phone rang. Lisa again. "Karen, did you get my text about Madison's tuition?" I watched my reflection in the glass cabinet door, wondering when my face had started to look so tired. "I did." "So, can you help? She might have to drop out if we don't pay by Friday." A familiar script, always a deadline, always a catastrophe waiting in the wings. "What happened to the college fund I helped you set up for her when she was 10? I asked. "The fund I'd contributed to every birthday and Christmas for years." A pause. "We had to use that for the roof last year, you know that." I didn't know that. Just like I hadn't known about the loan against their house the year before, or the credit card debt that had mysteriously appeared after their trip to Hawaii. "I'll need to check my finances," I said, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. This wasn't the script. I was supposed to say yes immediately, then wire the money before we hung up. "What's to check? It's not like you have anything to spend it on." The echo of David's words from earlier stabbed like a needle. "Look, if it's a problem." "It might be," I said softly. I paid off David's mortgage today. Silence, then. You what? You paid his whole mortgage and you're giving me a hard time about $4,000 for my daughter's education? I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar guilt rise like bile. I'm not giving you a hard time, Lisa. I'm saying I need to check what's left. God, Karen, when did you get so selfish? Mom would be so disappointed. The familiar arrow found its mark. I glanced at my mother's photograph on the mantel, her eyes seeming to follow me across the room. Um, would she be disappointed in me? I wondered. Or would she finally see what her family first mantra had created? 3 adult children who could never stand on their own? I'll let you know tomorrow, I said finally. Why? After we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my living room. Outside, a neighbor's child laughed, a sound carrying through the evening air like wind chimes. I couldn't remember the last time I'd laughed like that, with complete abandon, without the weight of responsibility pressing down on my shoulders. My phone buzzed again. A text from my oldest niece, Amber. Hi, Aunt Karen. Mom said you might help with Madison's tuition. While you're at it, I'm having trouble with rent this month, too. About $800 short. Love you. TX. I set the phone down without answering and walked to the kitchen, opening the refrigerator. Half-empty containers of takeout lined the shelves, meals grabbed between work and family obligations. I couldn't remember the last time I'd cooked a proper meal just for myself. The Portland offer floated back into my mind. 6 months away, 6 months to breathe, 6 months to remember who Karen Reynolds was when she wasn't solving everyone else's problems. I picked up my phone and typed a response to James. Uh, I'm interested in the Portland project. Can we discuss details tomorrow? I hit send before I could change my mind, feeling something that had been knotted inside me for decades begin, ever so slightly, to unravel. My father's voice was a ghost that followed me everywhere. Family is all we have in the end, Karen, he would say, his calloused hand heavy on my shoulder. You remember that? What he meant was, family is all they have. My siblings, their children, their partners. I was never included in the equation, except as the solution. The morning after my conversation with Lisa, I woke before my alarm, my body humming with an unfamiliar energy. I made coffee and sat on my back porch, something I rarely did despite having lived in this house for 8 years. The air was cool, the sky just beginning to lighten at the edges. My phone remained silent beside me. No early morning emergency texts. No urgent calls about unpaid bills or broken appliances or unexpected medical expenses. Just silence and the gentle awakening of birds in the maple tree overhead. Oh, at work, I closed my office door and spent the morning researching Portland, not just the project details, but the city itself, the neighborhoods, the parks, the restaurants. I felt like a teenager planning a forbidden adventure, my heart racing every time someone knocked on my door. James stopped by after lunch, contract in hand. Have you decided? I took the folder, feeling its weight in my hands. I'm in. He smiled, genuine warmth in his eyes. They're lucky to have you. We'll miss you around here. When was the last time anyone in my family had said they would miss me? Not my presence as a financial safety net, but me. Karen, the person? I signed the papers before I left that day. A 6-month contract with an option to extend. My hands didn't shake. My stomach didn't knot with guilt. Instead, I felt something expanding in my chest. Possibility, perhaps. Or freedom. At home, I found a FedEx envelope on my porch. Inside was a graduation announcement from Madison, Lisa's daughter, the one who needed tuition money. The ceremony was scheduled for December, 6 months away. There was no personal note, just a printed card with registry information for gifts. I I set it on the counter and opened my laptop, navigating to the family group chat I'd created years ago to coordinate holidays and birthdays. Hmm, I have some news to share, I typed. I've accepted a 6-month assignment in Portland. I leave in 2 weeks. I pressed send before I could reconsider, then set my phone aside and went to shower. When I returned, the chat had exploded. Lisa, what? What about Madison's tuition? David, you're just leaving. What if we need you? Melissa, David's wife. So selfish. Your mother would be horrified. My sister-in-law, Janet, the only one who had ever shown any interest in my life beyond what I could provide, had sent a private message. Good for you, Karen. It's about time. I responded to the group. I'll be available by phone. This is an important opportunity for my career. David replied immediately. Since when do you care about your career more than family? The words stung, but less than they would have even a day ago, because I finally recognized them for what they were. Not concern for me, but for what my absence would mean for them. Lisa called next. I let it go to voicemail. Then David. Then Lisa again. Finally, I picked up on her third attempt. You can't just leave, she said immediately, her voice tight with panic. Madison's tuition. I've transferred $2,000, I said calmly. That's what I can afford right now. But we need 4,000. Then you'll need to find the other 2,000 somewhere else. Silence stretched between us like a tightrope. I could almost hear her mental calculations, how to make me feel guilty enough to change my mind. Why? Mom always said, Mom's been gone for 3 years, Lisa, I interrupted, surprising both of us. And Dad for 5. I've done everything they ever asked of me and more. I've put my life on hold for this family for decades. So what? Now you're just abandoning us? Over one tuition payment? I looked out the window at the maple tree in my yard, its leaves rustling in the evening breeze. It's not about the money. It's never been about the money. Then what is it about? She demanded. How could I explain that I was drowning? That every demand, every guilt trip, every manipulative comment had been another weight pulling me under? That I had spent so many years being the family fixer that I'd forgotten how to be anything else? It's about me needing to remember who I am, I said finally, outside of being your ATM. She gasped. That's not fair. When was the last time you called me just to talk, Lisa? Not to ask for money or help or a favor, but just to see how I was doing. The silence that followed was answer enough. I'll be back in 6 months, I said, my voice gentler now. And maybe we can all figure out a healthier way to be a family. I hung up before she could respond, feeling lighter than I had in years, despite the tears streaming down my face. The next morning, my brother David was standing on my porch when I opened the door to leave for work. His presence at 7:30 a.m. was so unprecedented that for a moment I thought something terrible had happened. Is everything okay? I asked, my heart racing. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Lisa said you're really leaving. Yes, in 2 weeks. He ran a hand through his hair, now more gray than brown. Look, I know we ask a lot of you. An admission I'd never heard before. I waited. But we need you, Karen. Who's going to help us if you're not here? The question hung in the air between us, so painfully revealing that I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Maybe it's time you figured that out for yourselves, I said quietly. His expression hardened. So that's it. All those years Mom and Dad drilled family first into us, and you're just walking away? I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and saw not the manipulative man who had called me selfish after I paid his mortgage, but the boy who had never been taught to stand on his own. "I'm not walking away from family," I said. "I'm walking away from being used by family. There's a difference." "You've always thought you were better than the rest of us," he muttered, the momentary vulnerability vanishing. "No," I corrected him. "I've always thought I was worth less than the rest of you. That's why I've spent my life trying to earn my place by giving and giving until there was nothing left." I stepped past him, keys in hand. "I have to get to work." "Karen," he called as I reached my car, "what are we supposed to do about Christmas? Melissa was counting on having it at your place." I turned back, the morning sun warm on my face. "Melissa has a perfectly nice house of her own, and so do you, thanks to me." As I drove away, I caught his expression in my rearview mirror. Shock mingled with something that might have been respect, or perhaps I was simply seeing what I wanted to see. Either way, for the first time in my adult life, I was driving towards something instead of away from it, and that made all the difference. As the tipping point came 3 days before my scheduled departure for Portland. I'd spent the weekend packing, donating clothes I hadn't worn in years, and organizing the house for my absence. My siblings had been surprisingly quiet after our confrontations. No calls, no texts, beyond terse responses to practical questions about storing Mom's old china while I was gone. Then my doorbell rang Sunday afternoon. I opened it to find Madison, Lisa's daughter, the one who needed tuition money, standing on my porch. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy bun, her eyes red-rimmed as if she'd been crying. "Aunt Karen," she said, her voice small, "can I come in?" I stepped aside, surprised and a little wary. Madison had never visited me alone before. She perched awkwardly on my couch, declining my offer of tea or water. I sat across from her, waiting. "Mom said you won't help with my tuition," she finally blurted, "that I might have to drop out because you're being selfish." The familiar pang of guilt twisted in my chest, but I kept my expression neutral. "I sent what I could afford." She picked at a thread on her jeans. "Mom said you have plenty of money, that you're just being mean because you're jealous that she has a family and you don't." The words hit like a physical blow, not because they were new. I'd heard variations of this theme for years, but because Lisa had weaponized her own daughter against me. "Madison," I said carefully, "do you know that I've been contributing to your college fund since you were 10 years old?" She looked up, confusion crossing her features. "What college fund?" I sighed. "Exactly." Standing, I walked to my office and returned with a folder. Inside were statements documenting every deposit I'd made to a 529 plan in Madison's name, nearly $30,000 over 8 years. "Ye, your mother told me last week that they used this money to fix their roof," I said, passing her the folder. "That's news to me. Based on your reaction, it's news to you too." Madison flipped through the pages, her eyes widening. This doesn't make sense." "It makes perfect sense if you understand that your parents have been using me as their personal bank for decades," I said, the words coming easier now. "And they've been lying to you about it." Her hands trembled slightly as she closed the folder. "So there was money for my college?" "There was," I confirmed. "More than enough for your first 2 years at least." She set the folder down, her expression hardening into something that reminded me painfully of Lisa. "So you're saying it's my parents' fault I might have to drop out? Not yours for abandoning us to go to Portland?" I studied my niece, this young woman I'd watched grow up, sent birthday cards to every year, attended every graduation and dance recital. Had she ever seen me as anything more than an extension of her parents' resources? Madison, I said gently, I'm not responsible for your tuition. Neither are your parents, technically. You're an adult now. But they chose to promise you something they couldn't deliver, and now they're blaming me for not fixing their mistake. She stood abruptly. I knew you wouldn't help. Mom was right about you. As she moved toward the door, something inside me finally snapped, the last thread connecting me to decades of silent compliance. Did your mother tell you about the spring break trip to Cancun she and your father took last month? I asked. The one they put on a credit card while telling me they couldn't afford your tuition? Madison paused, her back to me. Did she mention that I paid off Uncle David's entire mortgage last month? Or that I've been sending your cousin Amber rent money every month for the past year? She turned slowly. What? Your mother has been telling you I'm selfish and mean because it's easier than admitting the truth, that she and your father have been financially irresponsible for years, and I've been enabling them. Madison's face crumpled. She said you have all this money you hoard, that you never help anyone but yourself. I laughed, the sound hollow even to my own ears. Look around, Madison. What do you see? A modest house? Furniture I've had for 15 years. I don't take expensive vacations. I don't buy designer clothes. I live within my means so that I can help when there's a genuine emergency. I crossed to my desk and wrote out a check, my hand steady. Here's the other $2,000 for your tuition, but this is the last time. She took the check, tears spilling down her cheeks. I don't understand. Why would Mom lie? Because the truth makes her uncomfortable, I said simply. The truth is that your parents, all of your aunts and uncles, except me, inherited money from your grandparents. Not a fortune, but enough to give them a solid start. Madison's eyes widened. But Mom said Grandma and Grandpa didn't leave anything. They didn't leave anything to me, I corrected, because I had a good job and didn't need it. Meanwhile, your mother and uncles spent their inheritance within a few years, then started coming to me for help. This was the family secret, the one we never discussed. How my parents had divided their modest estate among my siblings, leaving me nothing but the responsibility of caring for them all. Madison sank back onto the couch, the check clutched in her hand. I had no idea. No one wanted you to, I said, suddenly exhausted. It's easier to paint me as the mean, selfish aunt than to admit they've been taking advantage of me for years. She looked up at me, really seeing me perhaps for the first time. I'm sorry. Two simple words I'd never heard from any of them before. I sat beside her, taking her hand. I'm not telling you this to turn you against your parents. I'm telling you because you're an adult now, and you deserve the truth. We talked for another hour, really talked, perhaps for the first time, about her studies, her dreams of becoming a physical therapist, her struggle to balance school and her part-time job. Not once did she ask for more money, and when she finally left, she hugged me tightly. I'll miss you while you're in Portland, she said, and I believed her. After she was gone, I called Janet, my sister-in-law, the only family member who had supported my decision. Madison came to see me, I told her. Let me guess, Lisa sent her to guilt-trip you about the tuition? Yes, but it backfired. I told her everything. Janet was quiet for a moment. You know they're planning an intervention, right? The whole family, the night before you leave, to talk some sense into you. I closed my eyes, imagining the scene. My siblings and their spouses, perhaps even some of my nieces and nephews, gathered in my living room to emotionally blackmail me into staying, into remaining their safety net. I thank you for telling me, I said. What will you do? Janet asked. I looked around at my half-packed living room, at the life I was preparing to pause but not abandon. I think, I said slowly, it's time for me to give my family one last gift. What's that? The chance to stand on their own. After we hung up, I made one more call to the airline. Then I began to pack with renewed purpose, no longer preparing for a departure 3 days from now, but for one that would happen at dawn. Dawn broke clear and cold the morning I left. The sky streaked with pink and gold as I loaded the last of my bags into my car. I'd spent the night cleaning my house, emptying the refrigerator, setting timers for the lights, normal preparations for a 6-month absence. What wasn't normal was my departure time, 24 hours earlier than I'd told my family. Janet's warning about the planned intervention had been the final push I needed. I stood in my driveway, keys in hand, looking back at the house that had never quite felt like a home. Inside was a letter addressed to each of my siblings, to be opened at the intervention they thought was still happening tonight. Janet had agreed to deliver them. My phone buzzed with a text from her. Drive safe. I'll handle things here. As I pulled away from the curb, I felt none of the guilt or anxiety I'd expected, only a profound sense of rightness, as if I were finally steering my life in the direction it was meant to go. The Portland apartment I'd rented sight unseen turned out to be smaller than advertised, but flooded with natural light. By the time I'd unpacked my essentials and made the bed, it was nearing 7 p.m., the time my family would be gathering at my empty home back in Chicago. Yee, I imagined the scene. David arriving first, ready to lead the charge. Lisa with prepared notes about my obligations. Melissa complaining about the wasted holiday plans. All of them standing on my porch, ringing a doorbell that no one would answer. Eventually, Janet would arrive, feigning surprise at finding them locked out. She would use her emergency key, the only one I hadn't changed the locks on, and find the house empty, except for 5 sealed envelopes on the dining table. At 7:30, my phone began to ring. Lisa first, then David, then a series of texts, growing increasingly frantic and then angry. I silenced the phone and poured myself a glass of wine, watching the unfamiliar Portland skyline through my new windows. At 9 p.m., I turned my phone back on to find a single text from Janet. Letters delivered. Nuclear meltdown in progress. Take care of yourself. I smiled, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. Then I opened my laptop and began to write. Not explanations or apologies, but the novel I'd been outlining in stolen moments for years. The story I'd never found time to tell because I was too busy solving everyone else's problems. 3 months into my Portland assignment, the calls and texts from my family had dwindled to occasional updates, usually practical in nature. No more financial requests, no more guilt trips, just awkward, stilted conversations as we all adjusted to our new reality. The letters I'd left had been clear. I would no longer be their financial safety net. I would love them as family, but I would no longer enable their poor choices. And most importantly, I would be living my own life from now on, not the one they or our parents had prescribed for me. Guy, Madison was the only one who called regularly, our conversations growing easier and more genuine each time. She had found a part-time job that covered her rent and was applying for scholarships for the next semester. Once, she even asked about my novel, remembering a detail I'd mentioned weeks before. 4 months in, Janet came to visit for a weekend, bringing news from home. Gil, David and Melissa put their house on the market, she told me over dinner at a local restaurant. They're downsizing to something they can actually afford. I nodded, surprised by the lack of guilt I felt. And Lisa? Working 2 jobs for the first time in her life. She's actually doing okay. They all are. She studied me across the table. You look different. I've lost some weight, I acknowledged. It's not that. You seem just lighter in yourself. Happier. I considered this as I sipped my wine. I am. For the first time in my adult life, I'm putting myself first. Your mom would be proud, Janet said suddenly. I raised an eyebrow, skeptical. No, really, she insisted. Not the family first mantra she preached, but the woman underneath that. She wanted her children to be happy and independent. Somehow that got twisted along the way. 5 months into my Portland stay, James called with an offer to extend my contract for another year. I accepted without hesitation, then called Madison to share the news. That's awesome, Aunt Karen, she said, her enthusiasm genuine. I was thinking of applying to grad schools out in Oregon. Maybe we could actually see each other sometimes. The circle was not broken, merely redrawn. A healthier boundary established, a new way of being family. 6 months to the day after I left Chicago, I received a package from David. Inside was a check for $10,000, a fraction of what I'd given him over the years, but a start and a brief note. Karen, you were right. We've all been taking advantage of you for years. This is just the beginning of paying you back. Not just the money, but the respect you deserve. I'm sorry. David. That evening, I sat on the small balcony of my Portland apartment, watching the sun set over a skyline that now felt familiar. In my lap was my laptop, open to the final chapter of my novel. A story about a woman who discovers that the greatest inheritance she can leave her family is the knowledge that they can stand on their own. My phone rang. Lisa's number. Ah, I answered, my voice calm and steady. Hello? Karen, she said, her voice different somehow. I've been doing a lot of thinking. So have I replied, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. So have I. Perhaps this was the true family inheritance, not money or property or even obligation, but the courage to finally become who we were meant to be all along, to give not from emptiness, but from abundance, to love without being consumed. For the first time in decades, I felt not just free, but whole,